Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me thank you for being here. The stories on this podcast are meant to let you know that you're not alone in what you're going through and that we can all find strength in struggle with the right perspective. If you've been enjoying the podcast, let me ask that you leave a review on your platform of choice to help us grow so that we can continue to make the world a better place, one conversation at a time. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 174. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and here in Philadelphia in a podcast studio in the same room is a very, very, very special guest, Frank Aloise. Frank, how are you?
Good.
This has been a long time coming.
Yeah.
I was thinking of how to introduce you, and there are so many titles and characteristics and things that came to mind, but I wanted to give you the chance to introduce yourself first before I said anything to potentially taint your reputation. But yeah, how would you describe yourself to people listening?
So, having listened to this podcast a number of times, I'll go with I'm a father, a husband, a brother, a son, but also a connector. And I use that word because I love meeting people and then figuring out who else they might meet that I know and putting those people together that they might benefit from that relationship.
You've connected me with a handful of really amazing people, and a couple of them have been on the podcast, and I'm sure a couple more will be on the podcast in the future. With that being said, where did the connector part of you come from?
So I think it stems from an idea I have that, and this is not mine, but that relationships are really important, and it's something I taught my daughters and always talked about with them. Like anybody you meet someday, you might meet them again, and they might be important in your life. And I know that that's happened to me. I've had mentors, I've had people that have come back around in my life and had a huge influence on my life. And so I think it's that stems from this idea that I can help to create those relationships and build those relationships with other people.
I heard the other week this phrase that I'd never heard before, and it was, don't burn your bridges on the way up because you might need them on the way down. What does that mean to you?
That's exactly it, right? You just never know. Even someone that you meet casually, at work or at a party or at an event, you just never know what's going to happen in your life that you might benefit from a relationship with that person, or they might benefit from a relationship with you. And so you might come across them later on in life. And I always like to say this, every single aspect of my life, every job I've had, my wife, everything stemmed from relationships that I had in college. So each job that I had, even 10 years out of college, when I changed careers, came back to the dean of my college, was now in a different role somewhere else here in Philadelphia. And I saw him at an event at the art museum, and I got a new job and a new career as a result of that relationship. So I look at those throughout my life, those relationships that I've developed and maintained that then come back to sort of bless me in a way. Right?
So there's this book that I read, I want to say 10 years ago. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And when I first came across the book, it was recommended to me, and I kind of shoved it aside because I thought that just sounds manipulative. It doesn't sound like a book that I want to read because I want to come from a place that's genuine and authentic. And but I read the book eventually, and it's really simple. There are a lot of things, characteristics, skills that you could learn, and that if you do these things, eventually you almost in a way become likable. And it made me think that being likable is a skill, right? And so that thought has stuck with me. But what I battle with sometimes is, how do you not make it feel like you're doing it from a place of selfishness? And how do you make it feel like it comes from a place where you truly just want the best for people and you actually are interested?
Yeah, I think that's a little tricky. I have definitely met people who I feel are a little manipulative, right? And I try to be really careful with that most of the time. I mean, I think I try to be genuine, and not thinking about what's this going to do for me. I'm just trying to be a good human being,
Mm,
right? And try to find the best in other human beings. And so, if you think of it from that aspect, sort of a good heart
mm,
to start with, and a decent mind, ultimately that's the place you're starting from. And so you're not trying to manipulate. I'm not thinking, oh, I think I should be really nice to this person because I might get a job in 10 years. I
mhm,
just never thought that. I just was my genuine self all through college. I developed a relationship with this dean of my college, and 10 years later, when I bumped into him, he still remembered me. And we then developed a new relationship, and he hired me into my first job,
mm.
outside of, or my second job outside of the career that I'd started.
Yeah. So if we were to go back to the idea of being likable or being a good person or being a connector, what are some of the underlying skills or things or habits that you've developed over your lifetime that lead you to be a good connector and a great person?
So I guess remembering things is probably important. I'm not always good at that. Sometimes my wife has to whisper people's names in my ear. But if I meet someone that I'm interested in, that's interesting, and that I make a connection with, then I look to keep that person in mind for the next time I come across someone else, and say, so that was a good example. Some of the people that I've connected you with. I think it was uh, Jonathan Zaharik
Hmm.
from the Adirondacks. I thought he was, there were certain things, certain aspects of you and him, and I don't really know him that well. I know him through Instagram. I met him once at an art opening up in the Adirondacks. But I just thought there was something there that was, intriguing to me, that the two of you might hit it off. And also with Alex Crockford, who,
Hmm.
again, I've never met him. I bought his app many, many years ago for fitness, and he was a fitness influencer. You were starting out in that space a couple years ago, right? And I thought, oh, let's see. And he was very responsive at the time, even though he has a million followers or whatever at this
Hmm.
point. But he would respond to um, you know DMs in it at the time. So I thought there's someone that you could connect with. So it's kind of keeping those people in mind, and thinking about those relationships that might be beneficial for that other person.
Yeah. There's this thought I've been having. It's recirculated a few times in my life, but it's the thought of, when someone pops into your mind, if you can think a nice thing of them or you think of a connection, don't let it pass. Just take action on it. Because I've been through seasons in my life where every morning I woke up and I texted somebody that I thought of, and I said, "Hey, I'm thinking of you. I always appreciated how you did X, Y, Z. I hope you're doing well." And that habit has fallen off and come back and fallen off and come back. I'm a big birthday guy. If I know it's your birthday, I'm going to send you a text message probably at 4 a.m. And, you know, but it's hard because life gets busy and we've got all these things bouncing around in our minds. And those thoughts that are genuinely nice about other people can just slip by. Do you struggle with that? Or have you come up with a system or a way of, when you think of that connection, you just make it? Or do some connections slip through the cracks?
Oh, I think lots of connections slip through the cracks. I mean, I think it's more, we had a phrase that we used in my banking days. It's better to be lucky than smart.
Mm,
And sometimes that's it. It just sort of happens that you think of this or that at that moment. And so I don't know that I plan this as
mhm,
as thoughtfully as I might do, because it's not my business to do this. It's
mhm,
more something that I enjoy doing. I love to see those, and I do love to see those relationships develop. If I make a connection between business people or friends that could benefit from each other in some way. I really enjoy following that connection and sort of saying, hey, and I don't say it to them, but I personally, I get satisfaction sort of just for myself to say that really worked out well for that person. I'm happy for them, and it's genuine. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, that's got to be a great feeling. And before I transition us toward a different question, I'll just use this as an opportunity for people listening. If you have someone that came to mind during the past couple minutes, or you can think of a connection, just pause this real quick and send that text message, make the phone call, do that thing, use this as the reminder. And so with that being said, Frank, you know the nature of this podcast. You might have listened to more episodes than anybody else, and you're on the Stairmaster and you're on your runs, and you spend a lot of time listening to these conversations, and now you're in it. So I'm sure you've thought of your answers to these questions. So is that true, by the way?
Yeah, I've thought about it. Yeah.
All right. So
I felt a little intimidated to be on this, but
no, it's just a conversation, and I don't know what you're going to say, so I'll just ask the question and listen. But when you look back at your life so far, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not choose for yourself?
So I know the next question, so I'm going to put these two together.
Okay.
Because I think it's this combination of things that happen in my life at a particular time that was both hard things that I chose and then hard things that happened as a result of those decisions that I didn't really think about or plan, right? And so I'll go back to it was June of '94, and I had been working in an investment banking.
Can I interject real quick? I was 1 month old. So, okay, keep going.
I have that problem. I was working in investment banking. I was living in Switzerland, and I had been dating at the time my girlfriend, and we were planning to get married. And so I kind of said, okay, I got to get back to the United States. So I moved back to the United States. So between June of '94 and May of '96, I moved to the United States. I then quit my job. Well, first I got married. We had a baby. I quit my job. I bought 3 houses. We moved to Philadelphia without a job. Neither one of us had a job at that point. And so it was really a challenging time. A job, often for people, a job is a lot of your identity, right? And for me, I was in this investment banking world. I was a derivatives trader. Long story, if you know trading places, I was one of those crazy people screaming and yelling on the floor of an exchange, jumping up and down, throwing papers in the old days. This was sort of pre-computer trading days. And so it was a very intense, job. And I did that for about 10 years. And I really wanted to get out. I mean, it was really interesting because I was in a job that the people that I was surrounded by were not the people that I wanted to become. And that's what drove me to say, okay, if I have to become this cutthroat sort of backstabbing person in order to be successful in this business, that's not who I want to be. I need to move on. And so that was what drove me out of that industry. But especially once I had come back to New York City, I was on Wall Street. It was cutthroat. It was long hours and hard days. And so we decided that it was time for a change, but I didn't know what I was going to do. So here was how the relationship, the connector part came back, right? I moved to Philly and had these houses that I'd bought here, and it was very stressful. I mean, we went from having both of us having jobs to neither one of us having jobs, no income. With a new baby, we moved into a house with a 6-week-old, sorry, and I was renovating and building that house at the time. So it was just this combination of, if you think about all the stresses that they list, the stresses that you have in your life, and I kind of did almost all of them at once, right? And so it was this really interesting time of trying to figure out who I wanted to be, who I was now as a husband and a father, and trying to figure out what am I going to do for a career. And so it was really hard. It was doing hard things. And so I sort of renovated houses and did some real estate development stuff, and then stumbled into this new career, which I'm now been in for almost 30 years.
Wow. So if you go back to that time where all of those stresses were overlapping and you didn't know who you were and you were figuring out who you wanted to be, what were some of the thoughts that Frank back then was having? Because Frank now can look back and connect the dots, but back then you couldn't. So what were you thinking?
Well, there were times where it was fun, right? I mean, I quit my job. I was in a situation and a position where I could quit my job and move and buy a house and do all these things, right? So that was lucky. And but at the same time, I started to worry after 6 months, or what am I going to do? And I had to get up every day and do something. And I was renovating houses and literally doing some of that myself. I One of my fun stories was during that time was probably one of the times where I was in the best shape, besides maybe now, of my life, because I actually dug a basement in a house with a trowel and a shovel. Started with a crowbar and a trowel, and then ultimately with a shovel, lifting 5-gallon buckets out a basement window of a row house in South Philly that didn't have a basement, a full size row house, filling a dumpster out front by hand with 5-gallon buckets. I got yelled at by the dumpster company after I was done because you're not supposed to fill a dumpster that big with dirt. It's too heavy for them to move. But I learned some lessons. But it was challenging because here I was kind of doing these things every day. I would get up and have to go do this work that I enjoyed. It was physical labor that was kind of very different from what I'd been doing.
Mm,
But I also had to be thinking about what am I going to do next? I'm not going to do this for the rest of my life. I'm not going to dig out basements for the rest of my life, right?
mm,
So it was really there were moments that were really challenging, and then having a baby, leaving the hospital with a baby, saying, "Oh my gosh, what have we done?"
yeah.
And you get handed this infant who is now completely relying on you for everything, and you're just, we were in our, I mean, I guess I was 30 years old at the time, and I'm thinking, "Oh, what am I doing?" Right?
Mm,
So it was those moments where really there were times where it was really fun, right? Because
mhm.
the freedom of that was great, but there were times where it was really worrying, right? What am I going to do next? And I was trying to figure that out.
Yeah. In a lot of different ways, I'm sure there are people listening who either have been, are currently, or will be in a position where they just think, What am I doing right now?" And what kept you going during those anxious days and those times where you were doubting things or questioning things? What kept you digging out the basements and moving dirt,
Yeah,
literal
literally
moving
moving
of
to
dirt?
yeah, I started with a spoon, right?
Yeah.
And got a shovel. Um, so yeah, it was I guess I enjoy doing that kind of physical work. I still do that today.
Mm,
I renovate, I build things. I like to do that as a sort of offset to the sitting at a computer doing math. But uh, I think having a wife who was totally supportive. I mean, she was going to grad school at Penn. Having a child who totally relied on me. Having a really strong family on both sides. I have again. I'm blessed with siblings, four siblings. And parents who were unbelievably supportive throughout my life. I mean, I'm really lucky. And Sarah's family. I have a great relationship with her parents. So that all of those things, if there was any moment that I was really down or struggling, there were always people there to lift me up and
mm,
support me, and friends. Like I had a ton of friends in Philly. I'd lived in Philly before I moved away,
mm,
so we came sort of, it was a homecoming in some ways. I didn't grow up in Philly, but we had moved here. I had moved here before I moved to Europe. And so we had this little tight knit neighborhood of other people who were renovating houses at the time.
mm,
It was kind of a, it was before house flipping was popular, that we were doing these, buying these row houses and shells and fixing them up. And so there was a whole group of us that, we got out and swept the street in the
mm,
mornings and cleaned and planted trees on our block. And so it was this really tight knit community, and I had that in spades. Right, everywhere around me, there were people who were supporting me and encouraging me and answering questions. And I had a couple mentors who were always there for me. I could call,
mm,
and they would just say, "Okay, get out your pad and make a, positives and negatives list of things you want to do and
Mm.
figure it out." Right. And that was something I always did.
So this will tie into the previous podcast episode 173 with Aunt DeAndrea, who also ran the steps with us,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
we'll talk about. But during our recording, he said, if you can't change the people around you, change the people around you. And it sounds like from the world of derivatives trading that you were in, you couldn't necessarily change those people on the inside. So you chose, in a way, to change the people around you, and that was what got you through some of those hard times.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great line, and so true, right? I think, and I think there's other lines that you quotes that you've said, or that I think Ant might have said it recently. I saw something about this where make sure that you surround yourself with people who you want to be. And one of my mentors once said to me, and this was the guy who hired me into this school world. He said to me, hire people that want your job.
Mm.
And I thought that was really interesting and a fascinating idea. And you don't need to be totally literal with it, but the idea that the people that work with you and surround you understand what you're doing, and
Mm.
where we all want the other to succeed, right? And so when you surround yourself with people who are like-minded
Mhm.
and understand you and believe in you, that's going to make all the difference in your life, right?
Yeah. And so just to wrap up that piece of that chapter of your life, so to speak, what happened with the houses as you transitioned to this role?
So I fixed up a couple of those houses and rented them out, and we lived in one of them. I sold one of them. That was an investment. I had some investors in that from actually my banking days. I roped a couple people into this pretty interesting structure, almost a private equity structure at the time. And it was like, if I sold it within a year at a certain amount, they would all get twice the interest, on their return of their money, which I did do. Um, but I held those houses for a couple years, and then ultimately we had a second child, another daughter, and we decided to move out of the city. Well, stay in the city, but out of Center City, just because our living room had become a stroller parking lot and a bicycle parking lot. And we lived in this really cool Victorian row house. It was really pretty. I'd restored it, but it was just, we got a second car. We were both driving out of the city. I was working at Haverford. My wife was in Doylestown. It just made not a lot of sense for what we were doing. So we then so we sold that house and bought a new house and moved into the new house with a 4-week old. So we like to do these silly things. But at that point, actually, my parents came to live with us. So we built an addition on the house that we bought here in Mount Airy, and they lived with us for 21 years, which was really cool.
Wow. Now, just to go back to being a parent, and you brought new life into this world as you moved houses twice. On a previous podcast episode, I can't remember the exact number, but a good friend of mine, Todd Cuccia, who I think you would really like, so maybe that's a connection there. Works on Wall Street, has 4 young sons. His life is just chaos.
Hmm.
And on a separate call outside of the podcast, Todd told me that he was going into hunter-gatherer mode when his 4th child was coming into the world. And, it made sense. He didn't have to explain it. I think just that primal drive of I need to provide was there. Is that something you experienced when you had children?
Yeah, I mean that's a big worry you have when you have kids. I mean, you realize that they are completely dependent on you, and they are with you for life, right? Even though my daughters are now, uh, as we say, launched. They're both successfully out of the house. We're empty nesters, and they're both doing really well, and I'm so happy and proud of them. But they still come back at times, and there's moments where they rely on you. So yeah, you have to think about that when you bring life into the world.
Mm.
You're going to have them forever, and even with my parents and my family, even today, you call your family and rely on them or count on them for things. So you do worry about that, and that was always a worry, right? When I was doing these big moves and making these big changes in life, making sure that I was able to provide for the children and with my wife. I mean, we shared in that responsibility, of course.
Yeah. So since you mentioned your wife Sarah a couple times, I figured this would be a good point to explain how we got connected.
Yeah.
So when I graduated physical therapy school, I worked at an outpatient clinic. Ended up meeting Sarah there. She worked really hard. She told me about all the things that she was into. She might have mentioned you once or twice. And then she was good. She was healthy. She was gone. And then I ended up leaving that job and doing this. And one day I put up a poll on Instagram, I believe, about coaching. I don't think I ever told you this, but I think I put up the poll 2 times. You responded both times. The first time, I don't think I responded to you because I saw your profile picture and I couldn't make out who you were. I didn't know you were related to Sarah, but it just looked like an inactive account, an account was like, this is probably nothing. So I just ignored it. And then the second time you voted again, I was like, okay, might as well reach out. And we got on a Zoom call and we talked and or maybe a phone call, and it was just a good fit. And so I want to hear your viewpoint and perspective on where you were in your life when you started coaching, what you wanted to get out of it, and then take us through the journey. The ups, the downs, the things you loved, the things that were hard, and then we'll lead that to the stairs.
All right. So I guess the irony is that I was looking for a physical therapist at the time, right? Because I'd been doing, I have been fairly consistent in the last, I guess, 10 to 15 years working out at Urban Athlete in Mount Airy, but never to any kind of extreme, right? I was just a pretty regular customer, 4 or 5 days a week, working out in a class for 45 minutes, an hour. But I had injured, I forget what, maybe my elbow at that time, and I called it kettlebell elbow. um, but I was looking for a physical therapist. I said, "Oh, you have to go to Joe. He was great." And so I looked for you at where you used to work, and you weren't there anymore. And so then I looked you up and saw that you were not in this world in that job anymore. So anyway, I got physical therapy, and I think I did acupuncture. I really had some problems with that elbow for a while. It took a good almost a year to get rid of that problem. But at that point, sort of after that, it was post COVID. I've been sitting around a lot and realized, and then also a friend of mine had a heart attack, a major, major heart attack. And it was the time of Zoom calls, right? We were all sort of locked down, and he got a whole bunch of us on a Zoom call, and he had survived. He had survived this widowmaker. Only 10% of people survive this kind of heart attack. And he only survived because he was standing next to his wife when it happened, and they got help. And he gave us a speech on this Zoom call to say, you think you're healthy, but if you haven't seen a cardiologist and you don't go to a doctor regularly, even if you think you're healthy, this could be lurking, or something could be lurking in the shadows, especially sort of, we were mostly 50-plus-year-old folks. So he said, see a cardiologist. And so I did. And I was healthy, although both my parents have had heart attacks, stents put in, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, so I have a family history of this. So I said, all right, I should do something more, right? And sort of chasing my wife too, who that's another podcast episode for you, but she's an extreme athlete and Ironmans and Marathon de Sable and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I said, okay, I'd never been a runner. I always said to the coaches at Urban Athlete, I hate running. I don't want to run. And then I started running a mile a day in 22, and then decided I want to do something more. I'm going to try to do this extreme, Saranac Lake Sixer challenge. And so I connected with you to help me figure out how to do that.
And, in the beginning, I remember it was that challenge, and you wanted to go back to the cardiologist and get your blood work and make sure everything was good. And I know that that didn't change as quickly or in the way that you had hoped. So I would love to hear that first, the health side of things and why that was important, and maybe your thoughts on that. And then we'll talk about the physical pursuits.
So for the health part, I mean, I wanted to lower my cholesterol, make sure that I had blood pressure, all those things were good. And my cardiologist wanted to put me on meds, and was resisting that. There's some side effects or some things that, if you go on these statins, you're pretty much on them for life. And so I was really trying to fight that. I tried everything. It was partly the exercise to see if that would help. It was diet, lose some weight. It was food. There was a whole bunch of things, and some supplements that I tried. And I spent a year. I fought my cardiologist for a year on this. She was patient with me, but she just kept saying, if it doesn't change, I really recommend that you go on this. So, um, and everything about my life was pretty healthy except for the cholesterol. And she ultimately said, you can't control this. This is hereditary. Your family history is just telling you that you're not going to change this without the meds. And so ultimately I had to give in. But I did fight it for a good year, and part of it was trying to do hard things, and taking on some new challenges in my life. So
Yeah, and maybe one bigger lesson or concept, if you will, that you could draw out of that is the phrase strong convictions loosely held. So you were convicted that I'll exercise, I'll be healthy, I'll do these things and it'll get better. But when you got new information or you had the feedback and it hadn't changed, you were holding that conviction loosely enough to say, okay, I should change my mind on this.
yeah.
Which I think is an important skill.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I had to give into it. I mean, I understood that, and all the research shows that if you have this cholesterol problem, you're gonna have other problems are possible. So it's worth fixing, right?
Yeah.
And there's good research that shows these meds work. So it's worth it. But
So from there, take me from, okay, you're running a mile every day, you're going to group fitness classes, we start working together. Take me from there to Saranac Six and what that process was like through your eyes, and then tell us about the Saranac Six.
So I just kind of set my heart on this thing. I'd seen it done. I'd done the Saranac Six individually. The Saranac Six are 6 mountains in Saranac Lake, New York. Uh, it's become a challenge that the town has promoted. And so you can hike these 6 mountains, and it's about, I guess, 30 plus miles and 10,000 feet of climbing. But doing it as an ultra is doing it in one day in less than 24 hours. And I just said, all right, I'm going to do that, and family and friends looked at me like I was crazy. I don't know how my wife could look at me as I was crazy because she's done much crazier things. But she was like, where did this come from? Like, and all my friends who knew that I have never done these kinds of things or, kind of laughed when Sarah did these crazy races. So anyway, I started out just running, and getting coached by you for the running side of things. And, I was physically fit, but never the kind of endurance that it would take to do those kinds of that distance. And so just slowly, improved. And I was always surprised. I think when we spoke, I would often be like, oh my gosh, I ran, 10 miles. Oh, I ran 18 miles. Oh, I ran 20 miles. Oh, and I got faster and I ran up a hill. And yeah, I mean, there were times when I started out, I mean, it would take me, when I was running by myself, I started this without you, just the mile to the gym in the mornings. And it was, a 12.5 minute mile or a 13-minute mile. I mean, I couldn't run faster than that. I would walk up the hill. Right. And now I do that in, 8.5, 9.5 minutes and don't stop. And, running uphill is a non-issue, right? Which is kind of an amazing thing for me. I feel, I am in the best shape of my life at this point, besides maybe when I was digging out the basement. But this is a different kind of endurance. And, I ran yesterday, although yesterday was a slog. It was 12 miles of just what's smaller than a spoon? Because I did not have it yesterday. I couldn't get any faster than 10-minute miles in the trails. But sometimes those days happen, and I guess accepting that has been a really interesting lesson and something that you've helped me learn is that some days you have a spoon, some days you have a shovel, right? And some days it just doesn't go as well as you hope. And then other days you surprise yourself. I go out on a track for a track workout that you've put out for me, and I
Mhm.
do things that I never imagined I could do. I remember early on, I was training. I was down at the shore, and I was running these half-mile things along the shore, and I was running at 8-minute miles, and you said you'll do a 7-minute mile. And I don't know that I've done a whole mile at 7 minutes, but I've done track workouts where I've done faster than,
Yeah.
short stints at faster than 7 minutes, which is just mind blowing to me. I mean, it's been an incredible journey to get there. So ultimately, trained for those Saranac Lake Six, and went up and did that in June of 23.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And set out with the idea that I would do it in 13 or 14 hours, and did it in 11 plus. It was an amazing day. It was perfect weather. I had family and friends, again, all about that support system. My
Mm.
wife went all out. There was someone on top of every mountain when I got there, a family member or a friend who was standing there with either some water or just to cheer me on. My daughters were there, and other family. My mother ran with me for a quarter of a mile on a trail. I mean, it was just phenomenal experience, and I felt great. And running it, you run the end of it, you run into town, um, and all these friends are there, and it was incredible. And it's a challenge. It's not a race, right? It's a challenge that you do individually. So it's not like there's tons of people lining the streets. Like, these were just my friends and family who came out to support me, which was just so meaningful.
Yeah. And so I think it would be easy for a lot of people to say, okay, I did this challenge, I did the work, I'm kind of done, right? Like I checked that box, but you almost went in the opposite direction and you said, well, I can do that. What else can I do? And you continued to push limits all the way up until most recently the 24 hours on the Art Museum steps. And so before we jump right to the steps, are there other um, benchmarks or moments that stand out to you between the Saranac Six and the Art Museum steps that were pivotal for you or important for you?
So I think the training has been enjoyable, right? Oddly, have grown to love getting out in the woods and running on a trail. And I go on vacation, and I get up at 5 in the morning, and I drive half an hour to Mount Van Hovenberg and run, you know, 6.5 miles up and down a mountain just for fun, right? But it's mentally been really good. I have a fairly stressful job at times, and so this is a way to sort of release some of that. And people keep saying, like, why don't you go do these marathons and these races with lots of people, or why are you always running by yourself? I spend a lot of time on the phone, interacting with people, answering and solving problems.
Mm.
And so I have grown to love that sort of solitude of putting on some headphones and getting out in the woods in nature, enjoying a beautiful view, a nice day. And so I've done a bunch of other races, mostly trail runs. I love Uber endurance sports. He puts on some great races. I've done the
Mm.
Dirty German, and signed up for the Naughty Nick in December, which is a 25K. So I'm doing those kinds of things and those challenges, which are really fun. But I'm sticking to the sort of trail running idea as opposed to the street marathon
Mm.
events. But
And that makes sense. I can relate to that. You know, talking to people, interacting with people all day, every day, or even just using your mind to solve problems. There's part of me, and it sounds like part of you, that just wants that alone time and can find that through fitness. And I'll say this: you are one of the most consistent people that I've ever worked with, because I could give you 3 hours on a Stairmaster staring at a brick wall and you would do it. And then you would tell me, oh, it actually wasn't that bad, you know? So I appreciate your hard work. And that's the reason why you've seen results, is because you worked hard.
yeah, I think that's been really an interesting part of this journey is putting in that work and being consistent. You learn that your body and your mind can do amazing things, and that takes us to the stairs. But I will tell you that I'm no longer staring at a cinder block wall. Today I hung a picture of Italy, the Italian Dolomites, above the Stairmaster. So now I get to stare at a beautiful view of mountains.
And, maybe in the future there's a Project Endure group that goes and does that trip. But why don't you tell us briefly about that trip?
So this was in sort of preparation for the stairs, and just an idea that I saw in the New York Times. This article about a company called Holomites that runs trips through the Dolomites in Italy, and we managed to find 7 friends, or my wife and I, so three other couples, so 8 of us signed up to go to Italy in June and run across the mountains for 7 days. Uh, Unbelievable trip, so much fun, so beautiful. We met this our guide who was Antonio, who's great. He's actually in Nepal right now, climbing through the Himalayas, and we follow him, and he's in communication with us. But we became friends sort of for over that week. But it was just a phenomenal trip, and again, a wide range of experiences for the people on the trip. But most of us were pretty consistent, and we all set out to stick together and get across those mountains. So we did 100 kilometers over those. It was 6 days in the mountains, hut to hut, just carrying just our little backpack every day, and it was so much fun, and it definitely prepped me for the next adventure.
Well, so about the stairs. So for people listening who don't know what we've been referencing, I think I mentioned it. There's an organization here in Philadelphia, the Legacy of Hope, and they put on this 24-hour stair climb every year to raise money for essentially to support cancer patients in the city of Philadelphia who are struggling to find food and shelter and support. And so it's a great cause. One of my friends and previous podcast guests, Kellen Matthews, has done the event before, which is where I heard about it. And I knew you were hooked on endurance stuff, Frank, because I mentioned it to you. I said, just, I'm doing this thing. You should do it. And you kind of said, oh, yeah, right. And then I think 45 minutes later, you texted me and said, I talked to Gina. I signed up. I'm in.
So I had met Kellen at one of your Project Endure runs, and he's like beyond fit. I can only dream of running the way he can, but he chatted with me one time when we were running. We were actually on the stairs, and he said, "Yeah, I did this thing," and it kind of planted the seed. And then when you signed up, you're like, "You should do this. You should do this." And so yeah, I got hooked into it, but it was. I'm glad I did, and it was just such a great experience. I mean, it really taught me again those lessons of your body, your mind. You can do really incredible things if you set your heart and mind to it. I never imagined that I would run 100K on stairs up and down, and it was just amazing, amazing.
Yeah. And, I've tried to explain the experience to other people, and it's really hard to explain to someone who didn't also do it. And I know that you understand because you were there and we passed each other probably 400 something times going up and down the steps. And the one thing I remember saying to you, because there are parts of it that I didn't black out, but I don't know, I was just in a zone and a rhythm. And the 24 hours in some ways felt like it was just much shorter. And in other ways, it felt much longer. But I made the joke that the tortoise and the hare example, you were the tortoise, I was the hare, because I would sprint up and then slowly jog my way down. And every time I saw you, you were moving, you were jogging,
Yeah.
And so with that being said, why don't you give us the total numbers? So what was your total mileage and elevation roughly? And then we'll talk about the event.
So I mean, I wasn't quite sure what I could accomplish in this, and I'd never done anything like it. But we did a training day, and I'd done a couple other training, couple hours, and so I had set at 3 to 4 mile pace per hour. So I thought that 40 to 50 miles was going to be reasonable, right? And so I sort of had that in the back of my head. And then once I got there, and there were a couple other people who were pretty serious about it, and not everybody. It was really interesting because the group of people were quite a mix of people, and there were some people who were set out to do some sort of extreme endurance things, and others who were just hiking it in honor of family or friends. And I sort of had both of those in mind and the fundraising and all that. But once I started, I was like steady, it was, I mean, people ask me like, when did you sleep? And when did you stop? And when did you sit down? And when did you rest? And I said, I didn't. I never sat down.
Mm.
Um, I just, the tortoise and the hare, right? I just went very steady the whole time and sort of, you know, got to the 62 and a half miles, 100K, and about just under 14,000 feet of elevation. I recently looked at my Strava and I was curious. I looked up how much elevation I've done this year, and I'm at over 90,000. So I've climbed Mount
Wow.
Everest 3 times this year.
Wow.
And most of that was before the 24 hours on the stairs. So clearly the training paid off, right? I mean, being consistent, going on that Stairmaster hours at a time. I mean, my friends and family just are like, what are you doing? And then running the rock steps of the Adirondacks or the rock trails of Fairmount Park and Wissahickon Park here in our neighborhood. I mean, I did it, and it paid off. I felt great. I was smiling almost the whole time. There were a couple dark hours at 3 to 5 in the morning, but otherwise I was hard and steady. I mean, I hit 50 miles at 3:30 in the morning, and I was like, I can do this. And I was happy. And then friends showed up. Those were the only hours I was by myself. Otherwise, I had some family member, friend, colleague, somebody there cheering me on. And I had a couple friends who showed up early in the morning and ran with me. And I ran my fastest mile was actually my last mile,
Wow.
which that's to me even more amazing. And they say I thought I was clear headed the whole time, but they told me that yeah, when we saw you in the morning, you were a little delirious.
I remember slurring some of my words, and friends would visit and ask me a question, and I thought I would say the response right away, but it would come out 3 or 4 seconds later, and it was tough.
Yeah, it was sleepless. I mean, and I didn't sleep the night before well either, so it was really 36 hours of no sleep and full on exercise, and it was but such a great experience. I wouldn't trade it. I mean, and I'm looking. I actually I have to say this morning I was at the gym here doing the Stairmaster, and I thought, all right, I think I should go for the 100 miles. I
Wow.
think that's I had set out when I did the stairs. I said for my 60th birthday, which will be next year, I want to do a 60-mile race, 100K. And now I've done the 100K, so maybe 100 miles is what I
Wow.
have to set my heart to.
I mean, just to rewind about 30 seconds, you said it. You said it on the podcast, so I think that'll be good for you. I think that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious because my head was in a couple different places on the stairs, and it was nice to have, I guess, the distraction of other people and music and things going on. But I was really looking forward to just the overnight hours because I wanted it to all stop. The music never stopped, but the music was loud.
It was loud.
But I just wanted to zone out and just be in a rhythm and just almost be by myself for a couple hours. And I actually loved the evening. I'd say 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. was my sweet spot. But I want to know what was going through your head the whole time. You went through waves of up and down, but what were you thinking while you were running?
I I mean, I have to say, most of the time I was just so happy. I felt so good. I
Mm.
never felt like I wanted to quit. I never felt sort of negative. I mean, I was tired at moments, but I never felt down. And I really felt like I can do this. I can do this for 24 hours. And the other thing that was so incredible to me was the support from all the other people, not just my friends, but other people who were there, who people doing it, meeting Ant and Josh and some of these other guys who were just in it, and doing it with you and encouraging me. Like they figured out that and even some complete strangers have figured out that I was trying to go for 100K, and they were like, "Go, you can do this," and each time giving you a fist pump or cheering you on, and it just felt so good
Mhm.
to be out there with sort of like-minded people, right? And even friends who showed up who said, "You're nuts, but this is incredible." Like, and people who came at midnight to after going out to dinner, and one of my sponsors who showed up after a wedding in his suit and tie and ran with me. I mean, it was just great. It just felt it was really uh, a unique experience, right? It's hard to describe to someone who didn't
Yeah.
participate.
Yeah.
It's just,
Very unique. And for me, I guess the way you were describing it made me think of this, but almost, I think my ideal scenario for doing hard things is having the space to yourself to be by yourself if you want, but almost in tandem and in parallel, being around other people who are doing hard things that if you want, you can interact with, but you don't need to. That was just perfect.
yeah.
Yeah.
It makes me think of parallel play with little kids, right?
Yeah.
Who like sometimes they interact, sometimes they don't. And we sort of had that opportunity during the hours. You could just zone into your head. Although the music, I brought headphones and I had this plan that I had all
Yeah.
these podcasts and things that I was going to listen to, and the music
Mhm.
was just loud and it was fun and it kept us energized. But there were some moments where I was like, I would just love to have nothing right now. Just put on headphones and like these that we're wearing and
Yeah.
have like noise canceling headphones and be in my own head and silent. Especially in the dark hours. But I had people there until my wife was there until 1:30 in the morning. She did the spin class with my sister, who
Mhm.
drove down from West Hartford, Connecticut, 4.5 hours with my 80-plus-year-old mother, who surprised me. They were standing at the bottom of the stairs when I came down at some point. I had no idea that they were
Yeah.
coming. So all of those moments, there were so many friends who showed up and surprised me, and just
Yeah.
appeared at somewhere along the stairs. It was
Yeah.
just a phenomenal experience.
For me, I try not to make fitness my identity because I know that if it gets taken away from me, then if I made it my whole identity, I would be torn to pieces, you know? But it is part of who I am and how I see myself. Has it become an increasingly bigger part of how you see yourself over the past few years?
Yeah, it's really funny because I've never been an athlete. And now I have to say that I am an athlete, right? And
Hmm.
I didn't grow up playing any sports. I had jobs after school. I never played on a sports team. I failed miserably at Little League. Played for one summer and a Little League team as a baseball player. So I was never a sports enthusiast or an athlete, and now, I guess I am an endurance athlete of some kind. So it's become part of my identity for sure. And people that knew me or people that are getting to know me now, I mean, some new people in my life see me as just this endurance athlete and don't have the history of me
Hmm.
never doing anything like this, right? So this is a fascinating facet of a new me. So you can always reinvent yourself. You can always
Yeah.
change. Even, you can teach an old dog new tricks, right? That's one of my lines for you.
That might be the podcast title. I'll have to consider that. Old dog, comma, new tricks with Frank Aloise. So with all that being said, before we get to the question about endurance, what did you feel after the stairs? What did you do after the stairs? I know I had trouble falling asleep that day. Yeah.
What I remember and what my wife remembers are two different things. When people ask me, I say I felt great, and really I mean that in the days following, not the moment following. So I went home at 9, 10:30 in the morning on Sunday. I laid down on the couch with the recovery trousers,
Hmm.
the compression boots on, and drank and ate some stuff and dozed off. And then I tried to stand up and felt like I needed a walker. Like
Hmm.
my wife actually had to help me off the
Yeah.
couch. My legs did not work. I mean, I was
Hmm.
wobbly.
Hmm.
And that lasted through the day. I think I slept pretty well that night. Woke up Monday feeling great. I didn't go to work. I had a bunch of Zoom calls and things that I had to do, but I didn't go. I just felt like I needed. I didn't think that I could climb the stairs in my office, just small spiral staircase in an old Victorian house. So I did stay home, but and I felt really good in the morning. And then when I sat for some Zoom calls, and my legs stiffened up again. But then by Wednesday, I was fine, and Thursday I went back to the gym and ran. So for me, it was again the resilience of the body is amazing. I mean, I'm still sort of in awe of that, not of myself, but in
Yeah.
the human condition. You know, you set your heart to it. And I think you've said some things on some podcasts. I think I was listening to one the other day where, you know, you talked about people choose to be not healthy, but choose sort of have a positive outlook. And I really believe that.
Yeah.
It's sometimes hard. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
not saying I'm always positive. There are moments in life that are really hard, but you know, you can choose to stand up every day and get moving, or you can sit in a chair, right? And um, that's a choice.
I agree 100%. And I have two thoughts. One is about a Nike commercial I saw the other day that I want to talk about. But the other is, I think, so the morning after the stairs, I felt more or less what you felt, but I needed to continue my run streak. And I went out and I ran somewhere in the 8-minute mile range.
I
Yeah.
believe it.
And it didn't feel great, but I did it. And it's that idea or that image in my head of, when you have an old car and you try to start it, it doesn't start right away. I think we all have the ability to keep turning that until it does start and it warms up. And you could run it the next day, but you need to have that attitude of, I can do this in order to get it started.
Yeah.
So then the commercial is the Chicago Marathon happened last weekend from when we're recording this. And Nike put out this awesome commercial that was so relatable for me. Have you seen it?
I think so. I think I
Yeah. So it's these guys, like a guy and a girl, like they're in business attire and suits, whatever, going down this staircase in Chicago, limping, like real slow. And there's this guy, a taxi driver, and he's looking out his window, like his eyes are all wide. He's confused why everybody's limping. And, it was the post Chicago Marathon. And I think Nike had put words on the screen, winning isn't comfortable. And that pride that I think you've probably felt, that I felt limping the next day up and down stairs or whatever it is, it hurts. And it also feels so good because it's almost like this trophy that you get to experience the discomfort knowing you just did something so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So with that being said, I asked this question to everybody. And so when you think of the word endurance, what does that mean to you?
So I've thought about this a lot, one thing comes to mind, and I actually brought a show and tell. I have a book called Endurance, and it's by Lansing, but it's about Shackleton. And I don't know if you know Ernest Shackleton. He was a explorer, but I want to read something because this to me is the ultimate idea of endurance.
Perfect.
And so he put an ad in the Times in London back in 1913, 1914. And then I'll tell the story about Shackleton for those that don't know it. But he said, the ad was, men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. He found 27 people to sign up and go on this journey. And his goal was to cross Antarctica in 1914. And he took his ship called the Endurance. And they didn't succeed. They failed miserably, actually. The boat got caught and trapped in ice in 1915 and then was crushed and sank into the Antarctic Ocean. And he had to keep these 27 men alive. And he, over the course of 2 years, they survived on the ice floes and he got them all back. And for me, just the name of his boat, Endurance, and the idea of that. Think of this, 1914. There's no communication. No one knows what has happened to them. They are out there in the middle of nowhere by themselves. And these 28 people survive together and they figure out how to get it done. And they are floating on ice, on an ice shelf in the freezing cold with just what they could gather off this ship that was sinking into the water. They grabbed barrels of food and their dogs, and they got across and found somebody ultimately. that is the ultimate idea of endurance for me. And so signing up for something so hard that it sounds impossible and then enduring, getting there, doing it, and surviving.
Wow. You've mentioned the book a few times. I have a copy in my Amazon cart, and now I guess it's time to read it.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this: and I'm not sure if I read this wrong, but were you emotional reading that at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why?
I don't know. It's just an incredible story, right? I mean, when you think about the time period that this happened, and this man who was in, I mean, I think he was in his 20s or 30s when he did this, and he, all the other people too. They were all different ages. What's really fascinating is there was a photographer with them, and all of this is documented. And the ship was recently found. I think in 20 or 22, they found the boat completely preserved, of course, in the frozen waters of the Antarctic. So really, it's an incredible story. I mean, there's lots of conflicts about this, and some story, some questions about some of it, but overall, this man took this group of people and they survived. And so there's a lot of leadership lessons in this story. There's a lot of emotion, and the fact that this group did this, and they didn't succeed in doing what they planned to do, but they succeeded in something probably greater.
It makes you wonder, what is that thing in your life, in my life? Has it happened yet? Can it still happen? Does it need to involve life and death? Probably not. But, what is that thing that feels impossible for anyone listening, that maybe you don't succeed at it, but you have honor and recognition and so much growth that comes out of the pursuit? What could that thing be? And maybe this is a call to somebody who's listening who has been thinking about that thing. Maybe this is your sign to go do it. Yeah.
That's true. I think, I think there's always opportunities in life that are open, if you're open to them, right? And you can change and do things that you never imagined were possible. And so I think they're definitely, each person can find it in them to do something new and different, at any stage in life.
So before I, lead us toward the last question, I wanted to give you a chance to share anything you wanted. Is there anything else that through our conversation today, just in preparation for our recording, that you want to share, that you think is important, in terms of advice or stories or things that you've just found important in your own life?
So I guess I'd go back to the connector and the relationship piece, and again, that my life would not be what it is today without the people that have been before me and supported me. And I look back to, I mean, I was 12 years old, and this guy hired me into the school an after school job that I had till I graduated from high school. I was 12. I remember walking over to get my work permit at the district office, because my campus was in New York, where I lived, that was right there. And it was literally like the day after my birthday when I turned 12, and I wanted to have this job and work for this guy. And he became a mentor to me. And that relationship has lasted to this day. I'm still friends with his son. He has passed away, but his wife is in her 90s, and I visited her this summer at her home in Vermont. And those relationships that you build, and that those people who teach you life lessons, they're invaluable. And like we said before, like, reach out. If there's someone you think of, reach out to them and let them know how important they were. And that was this summer. I did that. I drove 4 hours each way on a ferry. I had to take a ferry across Lake Champlain to go visit Mitzi and see her again. And it was just such a wonderful, wonderful moment for me to share with her where I am in my life and how meaningful she and her husband were to me, and making me the person that I am today. And that's just one example. I have probably 4 or 5 people in my life, not necessarily family members, who have supported me, have mentored me, and those are incredible, incredible people, and changed the course of my life.
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of one of the previous conversations I've had on the podcast with Caleb McCoy. Again, can't remember the episode number, but he said, and I believe this is a Cherokee concept, but we're all just walking each other home, you know? And when you put it that way, you realize how important people are. And, we're all headed toward the same place, and someday you and I won't be here. And I hope that this recording still circulates and people can still listen and learn, but all the people you've touched will, either still be here or continue to pass on what you've given them in terms of wisdom and love and support and connections. And I think that's really what it is all about. And sometimes it can be easy to lose sight of that in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. And so I think conversations like this are a great reminder. And I don't know how you remind yourself of that from time to time, but I think it's important to remember that people and relationships are the most important thing.
Yeah. It takes a lot to remember that. I mean, it's so easy to get caught up in the stress of the day, and I have constant things that come up in life, and you're racing from this thing to that thing, and just remembering to reach out to those people that are important to you, and share with them where you are and what you're doing.
Mm.
Because you never know. You really don't know when that next moment will be that you won't be able to reach out to that person. And that's, I'm at a point in my life where that's happened to me. Probably 3 or 4 of my mentors are no
Mm.
longer here, but the lessons they've taught me live on, right? And so that is their legacy is an incredible thing.
Yeah. And I'll reference one more conversation from the podcast. A couple episodes back, Tim Doyle, he said, when you hug someone for the first time versus the last time, it's a very different thing. When you meet someone for the first time, you give them a hug, there's a lot of energy there. Maybe it's quick and it's shallow in some ways. But the last time you ever hug somebody, if you know it's going to be the last time, it's longer and it's deeper and there's more love there. And how could you approach every interaction as if it were the last time? And would you savor those moments just a little bit more? And would you say things differently or do things differently? And I think that's a reminder that we all need, because you do never know when the last time is going to be with somebody.
That's very true. Very
Yeah.
true. And I think that's accurate. Very accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have that image whenever I think of that, that image comes into my head of, and this has happened a few times in my life where someone's on hospice, or, it's probably going to be the last time you see them. And maybe in my case, it's been older relatives, but, it's different. You're not looking at your phone, you're not thinking about other things. You're just there with that person because you're not going to see them again.
Right. You're in that moment with them. Yeah.
Yeah. So, with that being said, anything else before I give you the final question?
No.
Okay. So, people listening to this are all over the world in all different seasons of life, going through all different sorts of things. But the truth is, we all go through our own battles. And some people right now are in the thick of a battle or a storm. They're in a dark place and they don't know where to go or what to do. And right now, you just get to speak whatever you want to speak right to those people. What would you say?
I would say remember that there are people who care about you, right? There are people out there, even though you're in a dark place or a hard moment or you think you're alone, you're not. There is a group of people somewhere out there, even if you've disconnected from family or whatever. Somebody cares about you, and remember that and reach out to them.
Mm.
They want to help you. They want to support you. And those are the things that I've learned, even in this new journey of endurance and pursuits. So many people have supported me and been encouraging, from my wife to family to friends who've said, "You're crazy, but this is really cool." There's someone out there who understands and wants to support you and help you. And so I think, don't forget that and make sure
Mm.
that you turn to them when you need them.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I don't know if this applies to everyone listening or just some people, but when it comes to choosing our own hard, I think that when you go for it and you put yourself out there, people tend to come out of the woodworks to support that. And you might get some people who don't understand it or don't support it. But I think when you put yourself out there, you end up finding more of those people who admire what you're doing or want to just support you and love you through what you're doing. And so if you're one of those people who's on the fence of being your authentic self or doing the hard thing that you've been thinking of, I would just say go do it and let the people come to you as you go do that thing.
Yeah, you'll be surprised. I think that's been a lesson for me is that the amazing support that comes out of the woodwork, and even from people who you didn't know, who now are become friends and supporters of what you're trying to achieve, and whatever that is.
Yeah. So with that being said, Frank, if people want to connect with you, reach out to you, thank you for this conversation, or just follow along with your journey toward the 100-miler and beyond, where can people do that?
So, as you've said, I'm occasionally post on Instagram is probably the only place. I'm not on any other social media of any kind. But I can be found. I have a presence on the internet, and you can find me on LinkedIn or on at my job, here at Springside Chestnut Hill Academy, where I work as the CFO. So, there's ways to find me.
Yeah, and if anybody has trouble finding Frank, you can reach out to me, and I'll get you connected. But you have been more active on Instagram since we first met, and it's been cool to see, you're running selfies and where you're at and what you're doing. And I just, I don't know, I appreciate you a lot, and I wanted to use this conversation as an opportunity to very directly say that you've impacted my life for the better, and I'm really grateful for that.
Oh, thanks, and you have done the same for me. So
Thanks, Frank.
it. Yeah, thanks.
All right, that's a wrap.
Hopefully it recorded.
Could you imagine if it didn't? If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.